Okay, welcome back to Criminal Justice 520, Policing. The first article that I want to talk about today is titled Broken Windows, which is a very famous article written by James Q. Wilson and George L. Kelling. This article focuses on a program designed in the mid-1970s in the state of New Jersey, and the intention was for officers to begin foot patrol in 28 cities. And even though the governor and other state officials were enthusiastic about this, police chiefs were still skeptical. In the eyes of police chiefs and other experts, foot patrol had been discredited. They thought that it reduced the mobility of the police, who had difficulty responding to calls for service, and it weakened headquarters control over police officers. Also, officers did not like the idea of being on foot patrol because they perceived it as being a form of punishment. We're talking about up in the Northeast where there are a lot of cold and rainy and snowy days, and they found this to be physically exhausting. However, given these caveats, it's important to point out that according to the authors of this study, the residents of foot-patrolled neighborhoods seemed to feel more secure than people in other areas, and they tended to believe that crime had been reduced. Also, citizens in areas that were foot-patrolled had a more favorable opinion of the police than those living elsewhere, and officers walking patrols had higher morale, greater job satisfaction, and a more favorable attitude towards citizens in their neighborhoods than other officers. So the question remains, how effective are walking patrols? And it seems that walking patrols do not decrease crime rates. The benefits of walking patrols are more along the lines of things like higher officer morale, greater job satisfaction, and more favorable attitudes towards citizens in the area. In addition, residents in the foot-patrolled neighborhoods seem to feel more secure. And finally, patrolling with an automobile increases mobility, but it seems to act as a barrier that depersonalizes interactions with citizens. So there may be a trade-off, according to the authors. And this article, like I mentioned, is very famous, and it represents a paradigm shift in policing. And that paradigm is the whole notion of community policing. This is one of the founding articles that really helped to establish that paradigm. There's some certain areas you should know. I would see what the authors say about graffiti and be able to give a definition of broken windows. The next article is written by Samuel Walker, and the author points out that the depersonalization of American policing since the 1930s has been greatly exaggerated. And he does concede that the patrol car might isolate police officers to some degree. However, the invention of the telephone in the 1930s and the cell phone in the 1980s has more or less eliminated this and has brought another dimension to interaction between officers and citizens. And the author also points out the control orientation of the police has been greatly exaggerated. And he says that daily policing is really just a matter of peacekeeping. And then he also argues there is no historical evidence to support the contention that the police formally enjoyed political legitimacy. And in fact, all evidence suggests that the legitimacy of police was one of the major political controversies throughout the 19th century and well into the 20th century in the United States. And part of that, especially in the earlier part of this country, was that Americans were extremely resistant to the idea of uniformed police officers. They reminded them of the British lobsterbacks with their long red coats that were impeding civil liberties, and they didn't want to have a strong police presence. That might be one of the reasons even today why policing is so decentralized in the United States. Walker argues that the watchman style of policing seems to be just as inefficient and corrupt as many formers accuse it of being. And this style does not seem to serve the needs of neighborhoods and does not serve as a model for modern policing. So he says the verdict's still out. And this is a very nice article to read after having read the Broken Windows article. And so I would definitely look at that one. The next one that I want to go over is by Laurie Weber Brooks, Police Discretionary Behavior. While all police are in a position to exercise discretion, the quality of that discretion does vary from officer to officer, according to Brooks. And she states that numerous elements may affect the outcome of certain situations. For example, police officers that work for an agency with, say, well-established or strict rules, they do not use as much discretion as an officer that works in an agency where there are vague rules that allow officers to have greater levels of discretion. She also says through the use and misuse of discretion, police officers will develop their own personal response style, which forms the basis of their unique way of handling a situation. So this is a very important article, and it offers us an overview of the various aspects and critical issues to consider during the discussion of police discretion. And so I would know some of the different items to be aware of are listed here. It would be a good idea to know how the socioeconomic status of a neighborhood influences the police response. Know some of the individual factors in the police officer that could account for discretion. Chapter 6, I'm not going to read the title of this chapter, but you can see it's an expletive. It's written by a very famous police scholar, John Van Man, and he talks about the labeling of individuals and how this is seen as a technique used by patrolmen to create distance between themselves and the people they serve. And by degrading the actions of an individual, social distance can be established to guarantee that a patrolman will not come uncomfortably close to an individual that they encounter while on duty. And it's believed by officers that if they get too close to the public, this is a sign of a bad cop, because as a patrolman you always want to keep your guard up and so forth. And also this label helps to explain the actions and statements of officers. The labeling process is an occupational necessity, because as an officer you need to be able to arrest anyone, and the arrest of anyone that is labeled makes the experience easier. It could also be a fulfilling or a rewarding experience. And any actions that are taken by a police officer during an encounter with someone that is negatively labeled, this represents actions against similar people in society that the officer has pent-up frustrations against, and these accumulate. And maybe he's not able to arrest that person in a particular situation, but the person that is labeled in this negative way will represent all of these other people. So symbolically it's very important, because the person with this label symbolizes all those individuals who would question the activities of police officers or even try to manipulate them. So the officer has disdain for certain individuals, and this unifies other officers in the struggles against them. In a lot of ways, this article is one of the precursors of the discussion of the police subculture, which we will be talking about later on in the course. And there's some interesting areas and things that you should know. Know how often police on patrol see themselves as enforcing the laws. What percentage of the time do they say they're actually doing that? You might be surprised. And know a little bit about the dynamics of the labeling process. Finally, this last article is one that I pulled up. It's one of my personal favorites. It was written in 1988, and it took place in a police department where the authors observed the interactions of Denver police officers in the briefing or the turnout room. When you go into a police station, you can see that it looks very professional on the outside, but if you walk into a turnout room or a briefing room, you might see a lot of joking around, a lot of humor, and the authors do a very good job of maintaining that humor promotes a sense of social solidarity among the officers, and it can be a coping strategy. And there are some terms that you should be aware of. Jocular aggression, what's meant by this? Also, how is humor, in a way, a neutralization technique? And how can the officers engage in what's called normative neutralization? How does this reinforce the street officer culture? Also, if an officer wants to get promoted, they have to normally shed that street officer mentality, which they may have been forced to develop by their peers. So a lot of interesting issues going on with this article. It's a fun article to read, but there are a lot of very, very important points it makes that are larger to the police subculture. That's about it. You have crossed the finish line for this session. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to clarify any of the concepts. And other than that, I will look forward to seeing everyone online. Have a great day.